much as anything else.
When you say commerce, the fact that Woody Allen's son, or stepson, Ronan Farrow, also produced a book there, and then had cried foul because, of course, he supports his sister Dylan and her allegations against Woody. And the fact that Ronan's book was actually a best, Catch and Run was a bestseller. The tills were ringing, weren't they? I mean, but it as background information, how pertinent is that to their decision to pull it?
Well, I think in a big way that was one of the major turning points. Ronan was very outspoken when he learnt of the news, but he only learnt of it a matter of weeks ago, when it was acquired much, much longer, or further back than that. When I say commerce, with regard to him in particular, I think he came out and said basically, if Hachette is a publisher who wishes to publish this sort of work, i.e. Woody Allen's, and also wishes to hide that from so many people until the 11th hour, they're not really a publisher that I wish to work with.
Right. And
so it would have been panic stations, believe me. And I don't necessarily think that Woody Allen's book would have been a surefire commercial.
Oh, right.
But plenty of bad people have written books, haven't they?
Correct.
Plenty of bad people have written books. So where do we draw the line? Yeah, the Marquis de Sade wrote a book. He was a rapist, serial rapist. William Burroughs, Saddam Hussein. He's published a romance novel.
But this is a modern era. We can do better.
This is the modern. Oh yeah, this is the woke era, is it?
Raven, I think in the modern era, you're right, Wallace. We can do better. I also think in the modern era, the way communications work and collective consciousness works, accountability is huge. And actually, to state the obvious, the last year, 2 years, the climate's pretty intense. We can cite other cases, for instance, the Michael Jacksons of this world. But I have been a fan of Woody Allen films in the past. And then in recent years, I mean, there's something icky about it, and I feel less interested in the Woody Allen story and what he has to say.
Raven?
Well, I guess there's the other thing that just happened is there's the Roman Polanski movie that seems to have won the French, Academy Awards, and everyone got really upset about that. But here's a sort of a literary question. I've always wondered this. I've never read the book Lolita.
Yeah.
Do you think? But it's I think it's not controversial to say it's recognised as a classic novel, published in the 1950s. Jeremy, do you think Lolita could get published now?
I think it could get published. I think the distinction there is the merit of the work versus the merit of the author, or the baggage you might bring to the author. I personally am doubtful that Woody Allen's memoirs would become one of the canon. I don't think it would be that significant a work.
Jeremy Sherlock, we've got to wrap it up. We're moving on to the next show. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And also to Janet Wilson, Raven Can. Great to have you on the program both. Thank you very much, Friday. I hope you get that date, Raven. And I'm back on Monday, 3:45. Checkpoint is next. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ai ki nei, Friday night and the weekend's all but cancelled. Disney closes its theme parks in California and Orlando. The PGA's cancelled and Broadway shuts down as the COVID-19 paralyses the US economy. Back home, Pacifica is officially cancelled, but WOMAD will play on. So what other events are in jeopardy? Our government's expected to announce more border controls over the weekend, and around the globe, markets take an absolute battering. In Australia, Flight Centre announces 100 stores will close. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's in isolation after his wife tests positive for the virus. Remembering the Christchurch mosque attacks 1 year on too.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Crews have almost finished packing down the stages and tents from the cancelled Pacifica Festival in Auckland. More than 60,000 people were expected to attend the festival, but it's been cancelled amid concerns about COVID-19 being transmitted to Pacific countries. The Prime Minister says New Zealand has a responsibility as a gateway to the Pacific to do everything it can to stop the spread of the virus. A sound technician, Wiremu Paipa, travelled from Hawke's Bay as part of the set-up crew.
Kind of shocked. So we'd heard a lot of it through the media, and driving up from Hawke's Bay, we thought it was all go. So it wasn't until today that we found out.
Wiremu Paipa says he is concerned about other events he's booked for being cancelled. And a Cabinet committee will meet over the weekend to further border restrictions because of COVID-19. The government says extra work is needed on the potential ramifications of their decisions, for example, on access to pharmaceuticals products that come into the country on passenger planes. At the moment, foreign travellers arriving from mainland China and Iran are banned from entering the country. People coming from South Korea and Italy are asked to isolate themselves for 2 weeks. Asia-Pacific stock markets have been hammered again as the panic gripping world financial markets over COVID-19 deepens. New Zealand's top 50 index fell about 8% in early trading, its biggest one-day fall ever, as it took its lead from Wall Street, where the main indices closed down about 10%. The top 50 index picked up this afternoon to be down 4.9% for the day. Japan's Nikkei fell as much as 10% at one point, while Australia's benchmark fell nearly 8%, but has also recovered in late afternoon trading. The New Zealand dollar is also steady above 61 US cents, and some early morning volatility saw it drop slightly. Christchurch's 3,000-strong Muslim community is rallying around to support each other as the anniversary of the March 15th attacks approaches. Hundreds gathered today at a special Friday prayers that brought the Linwood and Al Noor mosques together at Horncastle Arena. Friday is the day the shooter carried out the attack on the two mosques that claimed 51 lives and left as many injured. Tyrone Smith says the community are watching out for each other ahead of the anniversary on Sunday.
I suppose emotions involved in what happened around the time, and they come up, and you know, for all those whānau that are dealing with the mamai and that, hopefully we're there to be there and recognise what they're going through, be mindful around how they're handling it.
Christchurch Muslim Tyrone Smith. 4 men have been charged with murder after a man died in Pāremoremo prison last week after being attacked. The dead man was 25-year-old Blake John Lee of Rotorua. Detective Inspector John Sutton says investigators have now charged 4 men, 2 20-year-olds, a 23-year-old and a 39-year-old with murder. They will appear in the North Shore District Court next week. The Chief Coroner is welcoming 8 relief coroners being appointed to reduce a backlog of cases. The appointments are funded through Budget 2019 that set aside $7.5 million to bolster coronial services from Dunedin to Whangarei. Annika Smith reports.
The Chief Coroner, Judge Deborah Marshall, says the new appointments will work as duty coroners, so the full-time ones can focus on managing their individual caseloads. Coroners investigate the cause of sudden, unexplained or suspicious deaths and make recommendations that might prevent similar deaths. The average time taken to close a case was close to a year in 2018 and 2019. Judge Marshall says she hopes the relief coroners will reduce this wait so grieving families can reach closure faster. Ko Annika Smith aho.
It's 4 minutes past 5. The Black Caps are fielding first in an empty Sydney cricket ground in the opening game of the one-day cricket series against Australia. Fans have been banned from this match and the remaining 2 games in the Chapel Hadley series after Cricket Australia decided today to allow the series to go ahead in closed stadiums due to coronavirus concerns. A short time ago, Australia were 14 without loss after 3 overs. 2 All Black halfbacks will face off when the Chiefs host the Hurricanes in tonight's Super Rugby game in Hamilton. Chiefs halfback Brad Weber played a significant role in his side's big win over the Waratahs in the last round and has this week signed a 1-year extension on his New Zealand rugby contract as he looks to get back into the All Blacks squad. Weber says his match-up with the Hurricanes' TJ Perenara is an example of 2 different styles of play.
His defence is unbelievable. We saw some of the shots he put on against the Blues last week. Things I could only dream of, being a 75-kilo man, but I've got my own little ways that I get around the field too, so no doubt he'll be trying to stuff me out as much as I am him.
Brad Webber. The local derby kicks off at 7:05. Rugby Australia officials are meeting to determine how to handle the coronavirus threat ahead of Super Rugby matches in Australia this weekend, including the Crusaders game against the Sunwolves in Brisbane tomorrow. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, people sometimes say this changes everything. Will COVID-19 do that? Future correspondent Brian Walsh looks ahead. Dr. Maysoon Salama looks back to last March the 15th and hopes she can begin looking ahead. And Hilary Mantel has finished her trilogy looking back at the 16th century and Thomas Cromwell. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, some heavy off the east coast, gradually clearing tomorrow. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine. Isolated showers in the east and north clearing tomorrow. Bay of Plenty and central high country, cloudy periods. Waikato to Wellington mainly fine. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mostly cloudy with a few light showers in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Becoming fine in Wairarapa today and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland and Stewart Island mostly cloudy. Isolated light showers about coastal Fiordland tomorrow. For the remainder of the South Island, fine weather, apart from areas of cloud or fog morning and night. Cloud lingering in the afternoon in Canterbury and eastern Otago. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Disneyland closes its theme parks and cruise lines across the United States. Broadway shuts down and the PGA is cancelled as the COVID-19 coronavirus takes a stranglehold on the US economy. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in isolation after his wife tested positive for the virus on return from a visit to the UK. In Australia, as he awaits test results for the virus, Australian bowler Kane Richardson has withdrawn from his squad facing the Black Caps in a stadium with no fans in the stands. And back home, the markets had another rough day and the Prime Minister is expected to make an announcement on heightened border restrictions over the weekend. Fears about the coronavirus pandemic have also forced the cancellation or postponement of a number of high-profile events, some at the 11th hour. While the WOMAD Music Festival in New Plymouth and a memorial service in Christchurch to mark 1 year since the mosque attacks will still go ahead this weekend, almost everything else won't. This morning, the plug was pulled on this weekend's Pacifica Festival due to host tens of thousands of people, and the Corona Piha Pro Surf event featuring world champion Kelly Slater has been postponed indefinitely. Concerts further along the calendar, including My Chemical Romance and Deftones, have also been postponed. Amy Williams explains.
A lone Fale stands among empty marquees at Western Springs, where Pacifica Festival organisers were told this morning to pack down the stages and tents because of concerns about the coronavirus. More than 400 local and international artists were due to perform at the event, which was expected to draw 60,000 people. Sound technician Wiremu Piper was doing sound checks this morning when he found out the event's cancelled.
Kind of shocked. So we'd heard a lot of it through the media, and driving up from Hawke's Bay, we thought it was all go. So it wasn't until today that we found out.
Mr Piper's concerned about other events they're booked to set up.
I've heard of a few up north and some others down the line as well, looking like they're going to be cancelled from other crew.
Is the reason for the cancellations the coronavirus?
Yeah.
It's the second year in a row the Pacific Festival's been cancelled after last year's event was called off in the aftermath of the Christchurch terror attacks. At the time, the festival's production manager, Peter Van Gent, had stage gear waiting in warehouses to be taken to Western Springs. This time round, his crew had already set up the 3 stages.
Well, everybody's disappointed, obviously. There's nothing we can do about it, I guess. We're basically ready. We're just actually starting to sound check. Yeah, nobody likes it, but I suppose there's a bit of uncertainty, so I guess that's what's happened.
Pacifica is the biggest one-day Pacific Island community festival in the world, attracting visitors from our neighbouring islands. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand has a responsibility as a gateway to the Pacific to do everything it can to stop the spread of COVID-19 there.
The advice I received was that we did have a large number of travellers from the Pacific coming in. Now, one of the issues we've got in our favour is our ability to contact trace every time we have a case in New Zealand. But that really is reliant on those people continuing to be in New Zealand, self-isolate in New Zealand and have access to New Zealand's health system.
Ms Ardern says if COVID-19 was to spread in the Pacific, it would be hugely damaging to its health system. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says it's a precautionary measure and does not mean all events in the city will be cancelled. Tomorrow's St Patrick's Festival still going ahead. Mr Goff says the history of the spread of infectious diseases to the Pacific, including last year's measles outbreak in Samoa, weighed heavily on their minds. Associate Minister for Pacific Peoples, Carmel Sepuloni, says it was a tough decision to make.
We are sad that this decision had to be made, but we think that it is the responsible decision, and our primary consideration has to be for our neighbours, the Pacific countries themselves.
Meanwhile, the sports world is also reeling from cancellations. The brakes are on the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne following the confirmation a member of the McLaren racing team has tested positive to COVID-19. And all 3 one-day cricket matches between Black Caps and Australia in the Chappell-Hadley series in Australia will go ahead, but with no fans in the stands. Hamilton cricket fan Martin Stiles flew to Sydney today with his father and son to see the games. They landed in the city this morning to the disappointing news they'd be watching on television, not the stands. Mr Stiles says they plan to be cautious about the risk of COVID-19. And for those left stranded by the Pacifica cancellation, the Pacific Business Hub in Manukau is opening its doors tomorrow to allow stall holders to sell the food they plan to sell at the cancelled event. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
And staying home, it's been another roller coaster ride on the markets for the second day in a row. Joining us now is Mark Lister, Head of Private Wealth Research at Craig's Investment Partners. Craig, if we could start offshore first, it was a bit of a rough night in the US. How bad was it?
Very ugly night in the US. We had the S&P 500, which is the main index, down 9.5%. The Dow Jones off a little bit more than that, around 10%. We haven't seen those sorts of falls in one day since back in the 87 crash. So it was pretty ugly out there, and we obviously followed suit when we opened today.
So, give us the details of how we finished today, and also it was a bit of a rough start for us, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so we started well and truly on the back foot, and the market was down quite sharply this morning, sort of 8%-ish, 9%-ish down. It actually recovered some of those losses, and it's just closed at 5 o'clock, down 4.9%. So we've fallen half as much as the US. I guess sort of that's the good news. You know, from 3 weeks ago, which was the absolute peak of the New Zealand market, we're down just shy of 19%, whereas the US market is down sort of 27% from its peak, which was a couple of days before that. So we are holding up better than some of those big global markets, but still doing it fairly tough.
So tell me, Mark, who were the worst affected today?
Well, today the stocks that have reacted most negatively today are really the same ones that have been weakening right through this episode. So it's anyone that's exposed to travel, tourism, sort of discreet, anyone who will be a loser if we all sort of are in lockdown and have got to stay home. So Air New Zealand obviously is at the forefront of that. Their share price is down 12.5% today, and it's off about 47% this year. So it's really been hit hard. Sky City is another obvious one that would lose if we're all staying at home and not going out anywhere. Sky City was off 7%. off about 35% this year. And then you've got tourism businesses, Tourism Holdings, obvious reasons there. Vista Group, that's a company that sort of supports movie theatres. We won't be going to the movies if it plays out in a really bad way. And some of the retirement village stocks also, for obvious reasons, were quite weak.
So we aren't doing as bad as the overseas markets, but how much resilience is New Zealand showing and how long can that resilience last?
Well, we will follow those overseas markets. This is a global issue, and even though we only have a handful of cases at this stage, we do a heck of a lot of business with the rest of the world, and we will follow what those big markets around the world do. So we're just going to go along for the ride at this point. Having said that, our market does tend to be less sensitive, or it tends to fall less and hold up better during these really weak periods. You see that time and time again through these volatile periods, whether it's the GFC or otherwise. But, it comes down to whether the countries that have got these outbreaks can sort of get on top of them. If they can, you might have actually seen the worst of the sell-off. If they can't and half the world gets it and 20 million people around the world die, that's sort of your worst-case scenario, where it really does go global. And in that scenario, you've got further downside.
And recession?
I think a recession is almost certain. It will be really hard for us to avoid a recession when you just look at the disruption that's happening in parts of the US, look at what's happening in Italy. We're already seeing the slowdown. It might not be a worst-case scenario recession, but I think we definitely will see a recession of some magnitude.
Mark, are you talking locally or globally?
I think many parts of the world will slip into recession. It's pretty tough for your economy to grow as much as it did, 3 months ago or a year ago when everyone's staying home, half the businesses are closed, factories are only at half capacity. While it is hopefully sort of a temporary thing that blows over at some point, it still will take a fair chunk out of economic growth.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Mark Lister, who's the head of private wealth research at Craig's Investment Partners. More border restrictions will be announced by the Prime Minister over the weekend as the number of cases of COVID-19 globally continues to rise. There are now nearly 130,000 cases of the coronavirus around the world, with more than 4,700 deaths. The majority of those are still in China, but the death tolls in Italy and Iran are also climbing. Jacinda Ardern says the COVID-19 Cabinet Committee met late last night and agreed to extra controls, but there's more work to do on the finer details. Our reporter Sarah Robson has more.
At the moment, foreign travellers arriving from mainland China and Iran are banned from entering the country. Travellers from South Korea and Italy are asked to self-isolate for 2 weeks when they get here. Jacinda Ardern says more restrictions will be put in place, but the government has to tread carefully because of the potential knock-on effects.
Some of New Zealand's pharmaceutical products enter into New Zealand through passenger travel. We need to make sure that whilst we ensure the public health of all New Zealanders, that we also at the same time protect the health of those who may be reliant on such products.
Jacinda Ardern says the global environment has changed rapidly in the last 24 hours, not least with Donald Trump's ban on travel from Europe to the United States. And she's not ruling anything in or out.
I'm going to follow the best public health advice that we have to make sure that we protect New Zealanders' public health. But there are significant ramifications for every decision that we make. I need to take those into account. We need to mitigate against some of those impacts of such decisions. We'll be making those over the coming weekend.
Asked whether temperature checks would be implemented at the border, Jacinda Ardern says they're only useful for people who have symptoms, and you can still be carrying the virus and not have a temperature.
Because self-isolation is such an important part of our regime in New Zealand, there have been the concern raised that if you simply give a temperature test to every person entering New Zealand, that all those who show no temperature may be less inclined to actually follow the requirement of self-isolating, believing they are fine when they may not be.
Jacinda Ardern says over 8,000 people have been through self-isolation, while the number of travellers coming from places with COVID-19, like South Korea and Italy, have dropped off significantly, in some cases to single digits. Meanwhile, Brent Thomas from House of Travel says they are working with customers whose plans have been affected by the new US travel restrictions from Europe.
It's not just about the airline, it's also about hotels, car rentals, etc. But obviously for some of those customers, we'll be looking to reroute them through different stay places, and some of that may well be through some ports in Asia or some through the Middle East to get them back to New Zealand.
Aviation commentator Irene King says airlines are showing a lot of flexibility given the rapidly changing circumstances.
They're not imposing all of these additional, how you used to have to pay penalties if you wanted to rebook. All of that sort of palaver is gone. It's been wiped. And so you can reschedule, rebook without additional cost.
But Irene King warns it could be a long time before the travel bans imposed across the world are lifted.
My real concern is so that once governments intervene and put in place these prohibitions, they are very slow in removing them. They are very risk averse, and they become more risk averse as the situation evolves.
Jacinda Ardern will make an announcement this weekend about extensions to New Zealand's travel restrictions. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
To the US now, where the Dow has had its worst day since 1987, plunging 10%, as fears over the coronavirus and President Trump's travel ban sent markets into freefall. Disney has closed its theme parks across the United States. Concerts have been scuttled, the PGA's off, and all Broadway shows have been suspended until mid-April. Large gatherings have been canned and people are staying at home as concerns over the coronavirus spread. New York City is now the latest to declare a state of emergency. The BBC's Nick Bryant reports from New Rochelle, which has one of the largest clusters of cases in the US.
The National Guard on the streets of American suburbia, here not to maintain public order, but to safeguard public health. Boots on the ground for a mercy mission.
How many kids? One kid.
Providing food to needy families whose children have stopped getting free meals because of the closure of schools. People won't go hungry, but they're getting sick and increasingly fretful.
I think people are worried. I think people are nervous. But the idea is, with these resources that are available, it's about coming together, and perhaps it will ease a lot of people's nerves.
New Rochelle, on the outskirts of New York City, has now become ground zero in America's coronavirus outbreak. It's not yet in lockdown, there's still freedom of movement, but they've created a containment area where schools, colleges, houses of worship will be shut for the next 2 weeks. Residents here complain the Trump administration hasn't done enough, especially with testing people for the virus.
I think that they're approaching this situation very slowly, and it's not fair to the communities that are infected. It's not. I think they need to do more, produce more tests as fast as possible.
New Rochelle is a satellite town for New York City, and the fear is people who commute to Manhattan will fuel the contagion. Further down the tracks, they're worried the subway system could become a super spreader. So they've been disinfecting turnstiles and trains. But the Big Apple already has more than 50 cases. The Trump White House has been accused of minimizing the crisis, of wishing it away. And last night the president tried to project an air of calm, although the shock announcement of a European travel ban only added to the confusion.
We made a life-saving move with early action on China. Now we must take the same action with Europe. We will not delay. I will never hesitate to take any necessary steps to protect the lives, health, and safety of the American people.
At European airports, passengers rush to beat the travel ban, which comes into effect tomorrow, but doesn't include the UK. It was announced without any consultation with the European Union and without even alerting US airlines. At the opening bell on the New York Stock Exchange, they were bumping elbows, that new coronavirus greeting. But soon it was head in the hands as the markets nosedived in response to Donald Trump's speech. Trading had to be temporarily suspended for the second time this week. So the president who promised to make America great again is struggling with his biggest crisis yet, of trying to keep it healthy.
Nick Bryant with that report. And as Nick mentioned in his report, European leaders have criticised Donald Trump's announcement that his administration would suspend travel from 26 nations to the United States. They were blindsided by the announcement, but overnight a growing list of European nations announced their own bans on public gatherings. The UK has stopped short of that, despite officials predicting that up to 10,000 citizens could already be infected. The ABC's Nick Dole reports.
When the president announced his travel ban, it triggered a rush to major European airports. Spaniard Miguel Paracuelos moved his flight to Miami forward so he could get into the United States before the ban took effect. He says the president is inept and unable to deal with the virus in his own country, so he's blaming Europe. The president's announcement caused anxiety for Americans too. They will be allowed to return home, but Donald Trump's initial statement made it sound like they'd be stranded. Leo Leopoldo had just landed in Paris when he got the news.
We land and we get bombarded with messages from our families telling us Trump announced this and you can't come back and the end of the world.
While the EU Commission criticised the travel ban, there's no doubting the situation is extremely serious. In Italy, where more than 1,000 people have died, a lockdown has been extended to cover bars, restaurants and almost all shops except supermarkets. In Spain, where nearly 3,000 cases are confirmed, all soccer matches have been cancelled and members of the government and royal family are being tested. The Netherlands has had more than 600 infections and has banned large public gatherings and closed museums and galleries. And in Ireland, St Patrick's Day parades have been cancelled after the country's leader, Leo Varadkar, banned large public gatherings. Schools and universities have also been closed as a precaution, and people are being encouraged to work from home.
I know that some of this is coming as a real shock, and it's going to involve big changes in the way we live our lives. We've not witnessed a pandemic of this nature in living memory, and this is uncharted territory for us.
In the UK, there's around 600 confirmed infections, but health officials say there could actually be 5,000 to 10,000 cases already. Despite that, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's not following the lead of some of his counterparts on the continent. Instead, anyone with a cough or fever will be asked to self-isolate for at least 7 days.
We are not, repeat not, closing schools now. The scientific advice is that this could do more harm than good at this time. But of course, we're keeping this under review, and this, again, may change as the disease spreads.
But the Prime Minister said the country's facing the worst public health crisis of a generation, and he warned that families would sadly lose loved ones before their time.
Nick Dole reporting, and right now Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is holding a press conference. His government has advised against all non-essential gatherings of more than 500 people. It is 28 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on the issue of COVID-19. Do you think we should introduce more travel bans? From what countries? And if you were planning to travel, what are you doing instead? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. As Christchurch prepares to mark a year since the horrific terror attack which claimed 51 lives, worshippers from Al Noor and Linwood mosques have come together to share in prayer. Hundreds of Muslims gathered at Christchurch's Horncastle Arena under the heavy watch of police. Timothy Brown was there and filed this report.
Almost a year ago, as worshippers at Al Noor and Linwood mosques knelt in prayer, evil entered their sanctuaries. In little more than 15 minutes, a solitary gunman killed 51 people and changed dozens more lives forever. For Tamal Atachuju, the horror is still raw.
It's very difficult, not easy. So emotionally, of course, I feel sad today because last 2 weeks I was very nervous, but I'm more sad than nervous today.
He was shot 9 times during the attack on Al Noor Mosque. For Farid Ahmed, who lost his wife Husna in the Al Noor Mosque, the memories are also still fresh. He says he can still remember how he felt as the shooter's bullets rained around him.
I feel that I could die anytime, and I should not be afraid because I have got my freedom not to be afraid, and I have chosen not to be afraid. It is my choice.
The pair gathered with hundreds of worshippers from the El Noor and Linwood mosques as they came together for Jummah, the most significant prayer of the week. Tamalata Chuju says it was important to bring the worshippers together today.
This is us, we are always being together, so we are not separated, we are not broken. Yes, we are heartbroken, but as Imam Kamal said, we are not broken. So this is showing here is to most communities is coming here and then showing all around the world we are one.
Dozens of police officers combed the car park outside Horncastle Arena, checking vehicles for threats. A fire and emergency command unit was stationed at one cordon, and a police explosive detection dog unit was on hand, while the Eagle helicopter watched from above. Large concrete bollards blocked the entrances of the car parks surrounding the arena, keeping vehicles out, and members of the Muslim community assisted with security. Burhan Mirta travelled from Australia to be with his Muslim brothers and sisters this weekend. He says this afternoon's prayer was sombre.
Some of the congregants, you could feel that they were in deep pain. But in saying that, when you remember your loved ones and those that were martyred and those that were have lost their lives because of this terrorist attack against the Muslim community here in Christchurch, naturally so it's going to be sad and it's going to be difficult.
Ahmed Merkal lost his uncle Matiullah Safi in the El Noor Mosque. He was running late that day and narrowly missed being caught up in the attack himself. He says today's service shows Muslims they are supported and helps to heal.
We can say we are all in one, so we can guess that we are here, so everyone is giving us support.
Christchurch Muslim Tyrone Smith says the community are watching out for each other as the 1-year anniversary approaches.
I suppose emotions involved in what happened around the time, and they come up, and for all those whānau that are dealing with the mamai and that, hopefully we're there to be there and recognise what they're going through, be mindful around how they're handling it.
Imran Chowdhury says the Christchurch terror attack has changed New Zealand.
Well, I've been living in New Zealand for many years, so since last year it's quite changed now. And there is a well support from the local communities and the government departments. They're all very close to us now.
A heavy police presence is also expected at Sunday's National Remembrance Service, Ko Tātou Tātou, We Are One. Thousands may attend. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
And 1 year on from the mosque attacks, many in New Zealand are still trying to recover, whether from injuries, struggles with mental health or coming to grips with living without a loved one. One Christchurch 7-year-old saw those struggles and wanted to do something to help, so he started fundraising. Our reporter Logan Church has the story.
7-year-old Conrad has become a bit of a fundraising expert over the past few years, wanting to raise money for those who have less than him.
I got the idea from Mitchai and the Chocolate Factory because Dad said that some people who don't have much food, so then I had the idea of getting some food for people.
Conrad was one of thousands of Christchurch kids who were in lockdown on March 15. That night, his parents had to try and explain what happened. Similar conversations were happening in households all over New Zealand. But as his mum Sarah explains, Conrad responded with an idea.
It was when we were talking to him about being locked down at school and how some people would be scared and frightened and why they were in lockdown at school. And he said that he'd like to do something to raise money for the mosque victims and just to promote well-being and love and being strong again.
The family puts their heads together to try and figure out what they can make and sell. They settled on metal signs.
We made some signs saying Kia kaha to make people feel strong and brave again.
They had these cut out of sheets of metal and Conrad started selling them online and at local markets.
The thought behind the Kia kaha signs was that it's one piece of metal, but actually you get two signs from it. So somewhere out there in the community, someone has the other half of the sign. So it's bringing communities closer together as well.
The family then had to decide where to send the money. They settled on New Zealand Gifts of Love and Strength. Its organiser, Vicky Ann Parker, was shocked when she saw just how much money Conrad had raised.
The family actually gave me a call and said, we're coming in, we've got a little bit of cash, we've been handing it around and some signs to give you. So they came in after Christmas and I burst into tears because this wee boy had raised $800 and that's a massive amount of money.
Conrad had managed to sell about 50 signs. That money was used to help those affected by the mosque attacks, many of whom are still struggling 1 year on.
One wee boy lost his grandfather in the mosque, and sadly he's been bullied at school since the attacks as well. So being able to give him some swimming lessons has sort of brightened his day up. The woman that we've helped that's been in hospital, she is a Kiwi Muslim, and she's got about 4 children, so she's a very busy mum. And the other family that we're trying to assist in a lot of ways is a family of 7 children that are actually refugees that have come here that are part of the Muslim community.
But this is not the end of Conrad's fundraising efforts. He has ambitious goals for the future.
Probably make some toys and sell for them to get some people who don't have much money, eat some more stuff.
And he's also got some pretty proud parents.
Yeah, we're very proud of him.
For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
If you were listening to that story on your drive home, we'll put Logan's story up on our website and our Facebook page, and you can see the signs that Conrad has been making. Now, Conrad has sold out of his signs, but we'll also put a link to Conrad's website about all his fundraising efforts. So that'll go on our webpage, rnz.co.nz. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff on the impact of the cancellation of Pacifica. Another headache for Wellington Water as a burst water main in the central city left dozens of businesses high and dry. And New Plymouth Airport gets a flash new terminal. As always, we'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program this evening, especially if you're a stallholder at Pacifica and that cancellation affects you. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And Susanna is standing by with the headlines.
Crews at the cancelled Pacifica Festival in Auckland have almost finished packing up after the event was canned amid COVID-19 fears. The Prime Minister says New Zealand has a responsibility to try to stop the spread of the coronavirus to the Pacific. A sound technician, Wiremu Piper, travelled from Hawke's Bay as part of the set-up crew and says he discovered the cancellation only when he got to Auckland. And a Cabinet Committee will meet over the weekend to extend border restrictions because of the coronavirus. The government says extra work is needed on the potential ramifications of their decisions, for example on access to pharmaceutical products that come into the country on passenger planes. At the moment, foreign travellers arriving from mainland China and Iran are banned from entering the country. Asia-Pacific stock markets have again been hammered as the panic gripping world financial markets over COVID-19 deepens. New Zealand's top 50 index fell about 8% in early trading, its biggest one-day fall ever, as it took its lead from Wall Street, where the main indices closed down about 10%. The top 50 index picked up this afternoon to end the day down 4.9%. The 3,000 Muslims in Christchurch are rallying to support each other as the anniversary of the March 15th attacks approaches. Members of the Al Noor Mosque and Lindwood Mosques, which were attacked almost a year ago, gathered for a special Friday prayers at the Horncastle Arena. Christchurch Muslim Tyrone Smith says everyone is watching out for each other ahead of the anniversary on Sunday. 4 men have been charged with murder after a man died in Pāremoremo prison last week after being attacked. The dead man was 25-year-old Blake John Lee of Rotorua. Detective Inspector John Sutton says investigators have now charged 4 men, 2 20-year-olds, a 23-year-old and a 39-year-old with murder. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time now for Business News with Nona Peltier. Nona, another incredibly interesting day on the markets today, and aviation and travel stocks are the ones that really bore the brunt of it, weren't they?
Oh, definitely. So yesterday, some of our listeners may recall that Auckland Airport put itself in a trading halt while it updated its numbers. As well, Tourism Holdings also provided a warning that they were going to be upgrading their numbers again today. So what happened was this morning, Auckland Airport said, look, they're going to downgrade their full-year profit guidance by about $50 million. And that was because in the first 10 days of this month, passenger numbers dropped 18%. That's not the end of it. They expect those numbers to deepen. And, of course, we heard earlier about potential more closures of border at the border, which, of course, implies fewer planes flying here. I had a chat with Adrian Littlewood, who's the chief executive of Auckland Airport. He said there's no way of really knowing, but for certain it's going to be this way at least until the full financial year happens. That's reported in August, roundabout, because the year ends in June. Tourism Holdings, we also heard from them. They basically abandoned the idea of providing a guidance. They said, we just don't know.
So much the same as Air New Zealand said.
Very much the same.
Can't even work it out, so won't even bother.
No, can't even bother. So what happened there was Auckland Airport, it fell 7.8%. Now, these numbers improved, believe it or not, through the day. Tourism Holdings down 16.7%, and Air New Zealand's shares 12.5% down. Big numbers. And of course, our market really it was quite shocking to see it fall about 8% or so early this morning. Gulp. And then, of course, the Australian market opened, and it wasn't so bad. So it opened, it looked quite a lot better than the New Zealand one, and that's not typical. So what happened was, I guess people in this market thought maybe they'd oversold. So improved a little bit. And just before I came to talk to you, the Australian market was, down about 1%. And at one point earlier, it was down, I guess, about 8%. So that's a big recovery in a day.
Yeah, it's rebounded.
When we talk about volatility, I mean, that is massive volatility. When you go from being down 8% to being down just 1%, those are massive numbers. And this is the ASX 200 index. So, yeah. Obviously, Asia is also looking pretty sick. The Nikkei was that's the Japanese index. It was down like about 10%, in line with what we saw on Wall Street. But what was really unusual about what's been happening is it seems like all asset classes are being sold down, and it's not just normally when you have a market like this, there's safe havens. There doesn't appear to be any safe havens at the moment. So, and it's partly because people are looking to cash out. They want money. And
even gold took a hit at one point.
Everything did. I mean, there wasn't anything that was saved. Bonds, gold, these are usually considered to be safe things. No. But strangely, well, I don't know if it's strangely, who can say which way this market is moving. People who've been watching the market for decades are also scratching their heads somewhat. What it does point to, though, is that people are looking to cash out, completely cash out, because they need money. So that saw the U.S. Federal Reserve, put some money into the system, short-term money. Like we're talking about like over $1 trillion. A trillion. That's a lot of zeros, And then they looked to Europe to see what the European Central Bank would. They thought that they would cut interest rates. They didn't. In fact, they said some sort of, the president said some disparaging things about the market, like we're not here to serve the market. That did not help the sentiment, believe me. And we've seen that this week. There's a lot of disappointment in the way that the governments are not coordinating their response to this crisis. And so calm heads, there's not a lot of those.
And the numbers, how did they wash out at the final bell?
Well, as we heard earlier in our headlines, we were down 4.9%, so that's a big improvement from the 8% drop, never before seen in the history of our markets. That was a drop of 506 points to 9,827. Now, I know that sounds like, oh my gosh, but really, that was levels we saw in June 2019. So look, we're down, but we were way up. So I think, overall, people should not be panicking at this stage. The New Zealand dollar, 61.3 US cents. Now, interestingly, almost all currencies took a hit as people were trying to chase after those US dollars. At one point, we were down to 60.8 US cents. It was like, ooh, that's pretty low. But no, we picked up there. 97.4 against the Australian. That's because the Australian dollar is having a worse time than we are. And 48.8 British pence, which is just steady where we were really yesterday. And that's it.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news there. And dozens of Wellington businesses were affected by a burst water main in the central city today, which forced Wellington Water to shut off the taps. Those who remained at work were asked to use toilets in nearby businesses and given bottled water for drinking. Just after 5 o'clock this evening, Wellington Water tweeted the water had been turned back on. It also promised businesses there would be no disruptions tomorrow. But today's burst marks the latest challenge for Wellington Water, which is already dealing with major repairs to wastewater pipes in the central city. Rachel Thomas reports.
A burst water main in central Wellington on Friday is the latest headache for Wellington Water, which has been dealing with one pipe break after another for months. This one was a 100-year-old water main near the TSB Arena on Jarvis Quay, which burst at 4:30 this morning. Wellington Water's site manager, Sean DeRue, says the pressure from the water forced silt onto the footpath and shot water into the air.
It is a large job for a water main burst. We had to, clean up the road first, so the team's just breaking into the road now to get to the water main. As you imagine, this street's quite thick.
The nearby 17-floor Hunter Tower, also known as the ASB Tower, has been without water all day. The tower, owned by Robert Jones Holdings, is home to at least 16 businesses, including the Korean Embassy, the Electricity Authority and several engineering companies. Tech store Ubi on the ground floor remained open, though disruptions to parking outside meant less foot traffic than usual. Staff member Russell Abdullah says earnings were down several $1,000s by lunchtime.
Normally by this time we'd make at least $4,000 sale, but we just had made less than $200. Really less people coming in. I guess mostly it's because of the parking. There's another cafe next to me. They need water, so they're normally busy on Friday, so they're closed totally.
Robert Jones Holdings declined to comment on the shutdown, with a staff member telling RNZ it was an issue for the council to deal with. Office workers were seen leaving the lifts this morning, some of whom said they were off to work from home. Meanwhile, nearby restaurant Charlie Noble was forced to cancel its breakfast, lunch and dinner services for the day. At midday, the 70-seater restaurant would normally be bustling, but instead the chairs were stacked and the floor was quiet. When RNZ called, a staff member was busy cancelling reservations for what should have been one of their busiest days of the week. They say they had been told the water was due to be back on by 5 o'clock this afternoon, but that wouldn't give chefs enough time to prep for the dinner service. Sean DeRue of Wellington Water says affected businesses had been understanding, but some were surprised to be told they had to venture elsewhere for a toilet.
People gave me the blank look, but ultimately people were happy and understanding and made decisions based on how their business functioned.
Over the day, contractors replaced up to 6 metres of pipes. Sean DeRue says they're now figuring out what happened to the pipe to try and prevent it bursting again.
We will take a sample, which we will then send off to be tested and get an idea of, the reasons behind the burst, the condition of the pipe, the potential expected life. It'll give us a gauge of, are we expected to have further bursts?
He says businesses affected today should have their taps working as normal tomorrow. Nearby Hunter Street, which has been closed all day due to the burst, should be open again by tomorrow morning. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch about COVID-19, the cancellation of the Pacifica Festival. We'd love to hear from you if that affects you. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, and we'll get to some of your feedback a little later in the program. An Auckland businesswoman set up a breakaway pop-up Pacifica, saying it's unfair the festival's been cancelled when other events haven't been been. Auckland Council today canned the festival due to be held at Western Springs this weekend over concerns that COVID-19 could be transmitted back to the islands, like last year's devastating measles outbreak. That's even though the risk is very low. New Zealand doesn't currently have community transmission and only has 5 confirmed cases. Businesswoman Laura Kyle Hall is inviting disappointed Pacifica stallholders, including those from the islands, to set up at South Auckland's Pacific Business Hub. But it comes with the disclaimer: people enter at their own risk.
People would have already flown in from the Pacific Islands with merchandise, with everything, so I feel for them. And this is not just also a matter of, financial impact on them. It's also the mental well-being for our vendors as well, because there's going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of stress of how they're going to offload some of the product and some of the merchandise that they've spent probably months trying to get together.
So, Laura, you're expecting some of the overseas stallholders to take advantage of this pop-up market?
Yes. And just to point out as well that last year when Pacifica Festival was cancelled, we stepped in as well and helped some of the vendors that were affected last year. So
I can understand.
Yeah, sorry.
Can understand what you were trying to do here, but the reason that Pacifica was cancelled is there is a worry that people will travel back to the islands and could transmit the infection. So isn't what you're doing, well, it's counter to all the things that cancelling this event is trying to achieve, isn't it?
No, we're quite aware of the reasoning why they cancelled it. I mean, they're talking about cancelling Pacifica because there's people traveling from the Pacific Islands specifically for Pacifica. Yes. But then they're also saying that, they're not cancelling other major events, which is, I understand, some people from the Pacific as well will travel to those as well. So what's the difference? I mean, they've mentioned that, with the continued vigilance, the chance of widespread community outbreak is expected to remain low. So, we've done this, but we've also put it out there that, we're all responsible for our health and safety at all times. So we're saying to people, if you're actually developing symptoms of fever, cough, or shortness of breath, to please seek medical advice and not to come to the event.
So you don't actually think there's a risk from doing what you're doing?
There's risk in everything that we do. There's a risk of everything that we do every day on our daily lives,
So what, you think it's worth taking the risk in this instance?
I'm not going to say that it's worth taking the risk because, again, like I say, there's risk in everything that we do every day. I probably have, much better, I don't know how to say it, but risk of actually getting run over by a car when I walk outside than catching the virus here tomorrow. So I don't know.
Should Pacifica have been cancelled in your view then?
I think the time frames they have given, I think it's really unfair. To answer your question, to be honest, I don't think they should have. I know that there's some Pacific Islands that have actually put, some precautions in place to mitigate some of the issues and some of the concerns. So, yes, I think they should have gone ahead and not cancelled Pacifica.
You say that there are some other events going ahead. Why do you think they cancelled Pacifica and not the other events?
That's something that you probably need to ask the people that made the decision.
How would you feel, though, Laura, if people come along to this pop-up event and something does happen, that there is an infection that is taken back to one of the islands?
I've got nothing to say to that because I don't know what's going to happen and I cannot predict the future. And, I'm sorry, I got nothing to say to that. Like I mentioned before, each and every one of us has a responsibility for our own health and safety. So if people take the risk of coming or going to public spaces, that's on them.
Okay, so that seems to go against the advice of the Ministry of Health. So you're happy to go ahead anyway?
Yes, I'm happy to go ahead anyway.
And that is Laura Kyle Hall, who is setting up, well, basically a breakaway Pacifica. Some of you have got in touch about the cancelled festival. This person says, if sports, Pacifica and concerts are being cancelled or postponed, why is the mosque remembrance going ahead? Is this double standards and a risk as people would have travelled here from infected countries? Someone else says, is golf in Auckland mad? St Patrick's Day celebrations need to be cancelled. And then a third one here is saying, why stop at Pacifica only? Christchurch Memorial and WOMAD should be halted too. Keep your feedback coming. Text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Travellers passing through the new $29 million airport terminal in New Plymouth next week will find themselves immersed in the culture of the local hapu, Pukitapu. The building has been designed to reflect Pukitapu's ancestral story and reconnect to Te Atiawa hapu with its whenua. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Workers are putting the final touches to the new terminal, which was blessed at a dawn ceremony today involving iwi from around Taranaki. The New Plymouth Airport is built on land acquired through the Public Works Act in the 1960s, and it incorporates several pa and urupa of significance to Pukitapu. Celebrated Pukitapu artist Rangi Kipa has been instrumental in the design of the terminal and the cultural narrative it expresses. Mr. Keeper says when the hapu learned about an earlier vision for the building, it was made clear to the airport's owner, the New Plymouth District Council, that the hapu didn't want to be merely consulted, it wanted to be involved in its design.
They've been invisible on the landscape for long enough, and we're not going to take it anymore. So our people have an aspiration to be not only prosperous, but visible on the landscape again. And, that's just, I suppose, ground zero for us.
Mr. Keeper says very little of the architecture in New Plymouth reflects the indigenous culture. He says it's like Māori have been removed from the landscape. By contrast, the new airport terminal has the story of Te Atiawa ancestor Tamarau stitched into its very fabric. Tamarau is said to have come down from the heavens after seeing the maiden Rongo Ururoa bathing in a river. From their union came Awanuiarangi, from whom Te Atiawa takes its name, meaning descended from heaven.
So you can see on this side, this is Tamarau's, the rays of light, comes into the night sky, which is Puanga. Now the two of them join here in unison or in union where this is her womb. And so there's going to be a large 18 panel, 2 metre by 3 metre cast glasswork that's going to be backlit. And then there's a figurine in the middle of it that represents Awanuiarangi.
Mr. Keeper says Tamarau's story, which will be represented in 80 metres of stylised tukutuku panelling and whakairo, is perfect for a building which connects the celestial to the terrestrial. Teresa Patu is the chairperson of Pukitapu Hapu. She says there's no underestimating the significance of the development to its members.
It's huge. I don't think people actually have quite a full understanding of what it means to be returning back, So there's two focuses here. There's one of us returning back into the whenua and being part of the landscape and everything, but also us being seen by thousands and thousands of people as a business.
Ms. Patu says the hapu will have a permanent retail space in the terminal.
So every year we'd print a new T-shirt with part of the design that's already in the airport, and we're doing a lot of natural stuff, gifts that people could pick up, that had a Māori flavour and things to it. A lot of rongoa, that's made available, that's made here by some of our local people and everything like that. A bit of local art.
Ms. Patu says the arch shape of the building is also significant because it's a form of embrace and represents Pukitapu extending its manaakitanga to everyone. The Mayor of New Plymouth, Neil Holdham, says the project was the perfect opportunity to walk the talk in terms of working in partnership with iwi and hapu.
The history of Pukitapu on that land and the wider history of Taranaki, actually those stories haven't been told, and I suppose telling them through the visual arts with an audience that I think is more than 400,000 passengers a year is a perfect way to share who we are as a region.
Mr. Holdham is confident any critics will be won over by the quality of the work and the story it tells. But Mr. Keeper, who describes the work as his magnum opus, expects a mixed reception.
For some it will be with disdain. For some, it'll be with great clapping and glee. That's part of the contest of these lands. And so, but this is the tide. I mean, this land is browning up.
The first flights are expected to taxi into the new terminal on Tuesday. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Robin Martin aho.
Let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6. Vic says, I think we need to consider closing our borders to Americans. Given the lack of leadership in testing, community spread there is likely much greater than we know. Same for Britain. Someone else says, can you find out what happens to the considerable number of floating cities? The cruise ships, good point, which are stopping in New Zealand daily. Do the thousands of international travellers still pour into our small and big port cities and townships? Well, as far as we can tell, yes. And another person says, how about a Ministry of Health app to support self-isolation, advice on self-care, emergency contacts, and importantly, a reminder if people choose to leave home to take great care, use phone, GPS, etc. And someone else says, sadly, they're having to put their Japan trip on hold, due to fly out on Friday for 5 weeks to their brother's 40th birthday. So instead, they're going to take a 2-week camping trip around the East Cape with friends who are also having to cancel their trip to South Africa. And we'll talk to Phil Goff after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. New Zealand's share market clawed back some of its losses during the day after another rocky ride on the markets due to fears about the worldwide effect of COVID-19. The NZX 50 fell more than 8% with early trading but closed down 4.9%. Mark Lister from Craig's Investment Partners says they haven't seen those sorts of falls on Wall Street since the 1987 crash, but he says the good news is that New Zealand fell half as much as the US market overnight. He says the NZX 50 market tends to be less sensitive than others during the week periods, but the way ahead is still not clear.
It comes down to whether the countries that have got these outbreaks can sort of get on top of them. If they can, you might have actually seen the worst of the sell-off. If they can't and half the world gets it, that's sort of your worst-case scenario. And in that scenario, you've got further downside.
Mark Lister believes it will be very hard for New Zealand to avoid a recession. The Prime Minister believes the terror attacks on 2 mosques a year ago, which killed 51 people, have fundamentally changed New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern attended a special Friday prayers in Christchurch today that brought members of the Linwood and Al Noor mosques together at the Horncastle Arena. Ms Ardern says she was devastated when she realised the scale and magnitude of the attack on March the 15th last year.
New Zealand and its people have fundamentally changed. I can't see how you could have an event like this and not. But the challenge for us will be ensuring that in our everyday actions, in every opportunity where we see bullying, harassment, racism, discrimination, calling it out as a nation.
And the Prime Minister has announced the New Zealand flag on all government and public buildings will fly at half-mast over the weekend to mark the first anniversary of the mosque attacks. A police officer accused of raping his colleague called a lawyer shortly afterwards. A 29-year-old policeman is on trial in the Auckland District Court this month, accused of groping his colleague and later raping her as she slept in a Kerikeri motel. Today, the jury heard the man sent the woman 2 Snapchat messages before she went to bed that night. The woman never opened the messages and their contents remain unknown as the man later removed her as a friend and deleted the application. The court has also heard the accused called a friend who was a lawyer at 4:45 that morning. His trial was set down for 2 weeks but will run into a third. The United States have targeted weapons storage facilities in retaliation to yesterday's rocket attack on Camp Taji in Iraq. Yesterday's strikes killed 2 US troops, a British serviceman, and wounded 14 others. An official says today's retaliation targeted 5 different sites, primarily focused on weapons storage facilities and locations of Iraqi paramilitary forces. Dozens of Wellington businesses were left without tap water today after a 100-year-old water main burst. The pipe near the TSB Arena on Jervois Quay burst at 4:30 this morning. Tech store Ubi on the ground floor of the ASB Tower remained open, though disruptions to parking meant far less foot traffic. A staff member, Russell Abdullah, says the shop was down several $1,000s in sales by lunchtime.
Normally by this time we'd make like at least $4,000 sale, but we just had made in less than $200. Really less people coming in. I guess mostly it's because of the parking.
The main supply is scheduled to be back on shortly, and Wellington Water has promised businesses there will be no disruptions tomorrow. Central parts of Solomon Islands have been hit by flooding, which has knocked out bridges and caused at least one death. A number of bridges and roads have been damaged on both Guadalcanal and Malaita. A heavy rain warning remains in force for all provinces. It's 4 minutes past 6. Batting first, Australia have made a strong start to the opening one-day international cricket match against the Black Caps in Sydney. A short time ago, Australia were 100 without loss after 19 overs. In his first start of the Super Rugby season, Hurricanes co-captain hooker Dane Coles joins a reshuffled front row that will need to focus on their discipline. Coles admits that after suffering with cards in last week's loss to the Blues, his players could be excused for being a little reserved against the Chiefs.
Boys might be a bit hesitant, but I think that's what we've worked really hard on. You can still bring that intensity, but making sure you get your technique right. And I suppose there'll be a bit of a spotlight on us because of what happened.
Dane Coles, the Hurricanes co-captain. The match in Hamilton kicks off just after 7 o'clock. The Warriors aren't thinking about the end product for this year's NRL Rugby League season. Tipped by many to be once again towards the bottom of the ladder, the Warriors open their campaign in Newcastle tomorrow night. The veteran playmaker Blake Green says a positive start to the season takes an extra importance given their situation with injuries.
We're not a team full of superstars, we know that, but to get some reward early for some of the things that we've been working really hard on and put in place over the 4 months of the pre-season will just give everyone a real boost in terms of belief in what we're doing.
Blake Green from the Warriors. And the first event of Sailing's America's Cup World Series in Italy next month will not go ahead because of the coronavirus. Team New Zealand have confirmed the regatta in Sardinia won't start on April the 23rd as scheduled. The America's Cup holders say all teams are entering collective discussions with a formal announcement to be made in due course. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, they are hoping for rain on Country Life. Lots of it. Lani Purkis, bass player and music festival curator, selects a mixtape. We continue to follow the widows of Shahada as they try to make sense of life without their husbands following the March 15 terror attacks. And because it's almost a year since they happened, we've got a sonic tonic dedicated to kindness on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, some heavy off the east coast, gradually clearing tomorrow. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine. Isolated showers in the east and north clearing tomorrow. Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, cloudy periods. Waikato to Wellington mainly fine. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mostly cloudy with a few light showers in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Becoming fine in Wairarapa tonight and Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland and Stewart Island mostly cloudy, isolated light showers about coastal Fiordland tomorrow. And for the remainder of the South Island, fine weather, apart from areas of cloud or fog morning and night. Cloud lingering in the afternoon in Otago, eastern Otago and Canterbury. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome back. This is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. Global markets have suffered record falls as alarm over the coronavirus intensifies. When Wall Street finally closed after its worst day since 1987, it wasn't just the sound of the stock exchange bell which closed the proceedings. It was the sound of disbelief. This was how CNN reported it.
It's economic growth here that's on the line, and investors are trying to price what a new landscape will look like when we have a pandemic.
And you just heard the closing bell with the Dow down 2,300 points just in one day.
And as Andrew McRae reports, the drop is being felt around the world.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average has fallen 10%. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq fell nearly as much. Few parts of the market were immune. When the NZX opened, our own stocks followed Wall Street. At the opening, the NZX was trading down 810 points, or 7.8%, its lowest in a year. New Zealand trader Brad Gordon from Hobson Wealth Partners, who's been involved in the stock market for 20 years, says it's the most volatile he's ever seen it. He describes it as all-out panic.
And I think the reason why is there is actually not much that fiscally or central banks can do, given that it's a biological issue, and until we see, I guess, the delta or the improvement change in terms of numbers of coronavirus cases, investors are going to stay really nervous.
He says there's been both panic selling and opportunistic buying going on.
The real big worries are your direct exposures such as Air New Zealand, tourism, and the like, because I guess there's big question marks on how quickly these companies bounce back or how long this goes for.
And what about the ones that might be doing well from it?
They're your yield plays, because what we're now going to see is interest rates at zero, even negative, and so any company that's got a good stable earning base and a good solid predictable yield should perform well. We've seen Chorus particularly perform well of late.
Brad Gordon says financial packages are expected over the weekend from China and the United States, and hopefully it'll be enough to stimulate markets. Massive disruptions in international travel has prompted Auckland International Airport to lower its predicted earnings by $50 million to between $210 and $235 million. Chief Executive Adrian Littlewood says the lower prediction reflects a fast and evolving tourism and travel market.
We are monitoring information daily as it comes out, and naturally if there are significant further changes in route patterns or border restrictions, we'd need to keep updating that, but that's our best guide at the moment.
Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis has dismissed calls from the tourism industry to lift the travel ban on China. He says the government will continue to take their lead from health officials.
We understand that the tourism sector is feeling the pain, but we will not make decisions unless they're based on good, solid health advice, and that's where we leave it. We can't really make decisions based on people who are saying that they know better than the Ministry of Health.
The Chief Executive of Westpac Bank, David McLean, says the government and business need to work together to get through the crisis. He's urging anyone suffering from the economic effects of COVID-19 to speak to their bank sooner rather than later.
The sooner we can get around the table and talk about it, the sooner we can put in place things that we might be able to offer, like, interest holidays and more working capital, the better. If people hold off too long, often it can get away from them. So we're committed to supporting our customers through it. It's in our own best interest to do that anyway.
Forestry contractors running at a loss due to the COVID-19 slowdown are looking closely for signs of a pickup in the China market. The Chief Executive of the Forest Industry Contractors Association, Prue Younger, says it's a waiting game.
It's a matter of clearing stocks on the ports, and at the moment I know in New Zealand we're getting reasonably close to full on our own port space. So there's got to become either a crossing roads where it's chocker at both ends, and we're suspecting that's getting pretty close, or there's going to be an instant relief at the Chinese end. So really hard for us to predict, that's for sure.
Prue Younger says many large contractors are running at between 50 and 75% of usual production, while they wait and see what happens. The Employers and Manufacturers Association is warning businesses not to knowingly allow workers to come to work when they are sick with COVID-19 or being advised to self-isolate. Its General Counsel Matt Deering says if they do, then they're likely to be in breach of the Health and Safety at Work Act.
I think as long as both parties act in good faith, so if there's genuine attempts and to obtain medical certificates, then, and if that's unable to actually happen, then the employer needs to act in a fair and reasonable manner, as does the employee.
Matt Deering says the simple message is for workers to stay home if they are sick and not to try and battle on at work. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
One down and one in jeopardy. Polyfest, the largest Pacific dance festival due to kick off next week, is at risk after Auckland Council pulled the pin on the Pacifica Festival because of concerns around COVID-19. Polyfest is a cultural event for schools that attracts more than 100,000 visitors over 4 days every year. It's due to start in Auckland on Wednesday. The decision's already been made to cancel the Pacifica Festival at Western Springs this weekend because of worries that the virus could be transmitted transmitted back to the islands, like last year's devastating measles outbreak. That's even though the risk is very low. Mayor Phil Goff says it was a tough call, but the right one.
It is an enormous decision, and it's one that we got to reluctantly and regretfully, but one that we felt that we had to make. The key change was not that the health department's advice has changed. It hasn't. They're saying that large events can still occur because coronavirus in Auckland and in New Zealand is still constrained, and there is no evidence yet of it spreading person to person outside of a family situation. What has changed is that we know that some hundreds of people are coming to Pacifica from the Pacific Islands. While the risk of them contracting COVID-19 is low, should they do that and carry it back to the islands, it's very clear that the impact on the islands would be disastrous. They've seen that before, back in 1918, with the massive loss of life with the influenza epidemic of that year. We saw it last year with 82 lives being lost, mainly children in Samoa. And why we got to the position we did was, we just didn't think we could take that risk with the enormous impact it would have on our Pacific neighbours. What will it cost? Well, there will be a cost. I haven't got the specifics of the cost from ATED yet, but that cost does not outweigh the health and safety and well-being considerations that led us to this decision.
Understand the reasoning behind it. In terms of the costs, though, what would you normally provide? What, security, barriers, the park? What else? What kind of expenses would be attached to it?
Oh, ATED provides all the setup and, obviously the provision of the park itself and all of the services that are available there. So a big effort that has gone into organising that and, the tragedy.
So tens of thousands of dollars?
I think it probably would be. I don't have the specific figure to hand, but it is very likely in that vicinity.
So why leave the decision until today?
Well, right up till the last few days, we've been very much relying, as we ought, on the Ministry of Health advice, and I believe they're doing a very competent job. They're saying, well, so far, with good management and good luck in Auckland, we have constrained the number of cases to 5. There have been no new cases reported in the last 4 days or so, and it is still low risk to organise a mass gathering of this sort. And I've relied on that advice, and properly so. But I think the other factor that you can't expect the Ministry of Health to take into the equation is, even if it's low risk, what the potential impact would be if that was to involve a case of transmission back to the Pacific, which doesn't have the health systems, which doesn't have the resources that we have to properly constrain and deal with an outbreak of the infection.
What about other events, though? So you've got the Arts Festival coming, there's the Avondale Markets, that attracts a lot of people. We have a lot of concerts in Auckland. What could be next to go?
Well, I think that depends on circumstances. I've been looking very closely at the figures in places like Italy and France and Spain. And, Italy's gone in the space of 2 weeks from 0 to 12,500 cases. France to, well over 2,000 cases. And Germany, almost 2,000 cases. Once the COVID-19 takes grip in a community, then it's very hard to stop it spreading. If we were to get to that point, and we're all working and praying that it doesn't, but if it were to get into that to that point, then I think you'd have a widespread cancellation of events right across the board. And we're talking there, about everything from the March the 15th commemoration, which occurs on Sunday, to Polyfest, which is just in the middle of next week, to the rugby, and we've got a rugby and rugby league double-header match at Eden Park that I was planning to go to in a couple of weeks' time. A serious deterioration or a significant deterioration in the spread of the virus would, I think, lead to that cancellation. And we've seen that already with Piha cancelling its surf lifesaving. Probably not a hugely high-risk area, but people erring on the side of caution. The cancellation of the Grand Prix in Australia is in the same category.
So is Polyfest safe for now?
I'm seeking advice on that. if Polyfest does involve groups coming from outside of the country, from the
Exactly,
Pacific,
so how is it different from Pacifica?
Then I think we will be talking very soon to the organisers about the appropriateness of that event going forward. I'm simply, before I make that decision, or before Council makes that decision, I want to confer further with government agencies, the health authorities. I want to talk to the organisers. I want to make sure that we have all of the facts and that we're making the decision on a sound, rational basis.
So are you talking to those festival organisers right now, Polyfest?
We are getting in touch with them as we speak, and it's important that we do so.
So potentially that is in jeopardy?
Potentially it is, yes.
When will you make a final decision on that?
That decision needs to be made probably today or at the latest over the weekend.
And how many people is that going to affect, do you know?
Well, we've got 60,000 that would have come to Pacifica. The number for Polyfest is even larger, probably 90 to 100,000. And the tragedy for Pacifica is this time last year we cancelled it because of the mosque attacks and on the advice of the police. This year we're cancelling it on advice of the risk to the wider Pacific region. Polyfest was cut short by 1 day last year. These are great events. They're our celebration of the vibrancy and the strength of the Pacifica community and our multiculturalism. So we don't take the step lightly. But in the end, we do have to err on the side of caution. In the end, we've got to put health and safety first, and that's what we'll be doing.
Given the logic you have applied when you're cancelling Pacifica, that same logic applies to Polyfest, does it not? So why not just call it now and cancel it?
Because I haven't had the chance to speak with the organisers of Polyfest about that, and it would be utterly inappropriate for me to make a unilateral decision without first fully consulting with them and having further information that I need from government agencies.
Will you be suggesting to them that it's in the best interests of everybody that it's cancelled?
Well, I want to listen to the advice and make my suggestions arising out of the information that is provided to me. That's quite important. Look, I think people have been incredibly sympathetic about why we've had to cancel Pacifica, but people would very quickly take an opposite view if they thought that we were doing these things without fully thinking through all of the consequences and determining the level of risk that the community might or might not be prepared to take.
And that's Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. It is 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The University of Otago is embarking on an ambitious research project to better understand the mental health impact of the Christchurch mosque attacks. Almost a year on, some are so traumatised they're not able to leave their homes or have been reluctant to seek help due to cultural beliefs. Conan Young spoke to a pair of researchers keen to ensure the help is getting to where it is most needed.
Dr. Rakaya Suleiman-Hill is a researcher and a member of Christchurch's 3,000-strong Muslim community.
You know, all of us have been touched by this. We've all had friends who were killed. We've all been involved in the response. I was not at the mosque on March 15, but I was aware of the attacks within the first 20 minutes. And so many of us sort of got together to support our community as much as we could in those early days, and this has sort of carried on right through the year.
The study she's involved in has the twin aims of finding out what is and is not working when it comes to the help people have been getting with their mental health, but also of identifying those who have yet to come forward. Dr. Suleiman-Hill has heard of some that are still too afraid to leave their homes.
In a lot of these cultures, there is stigma around talking about mental health issues, and we appreciate that, especially for men. It's very difficult for men to reach out, and so they are a key group that we really would like to make contact with.
Lead researcher Dr. Caroline Bell says the aim is to interview as many as 500 people through the course of this year, including witnesses to the shootings, the injured, the bereaved, and the immediate families of these three groups.
So we've trained 16 lay Muslim interviewers from the local community,
most of them from health-related backgrounds, an extremely able group of people who've put their hands up to do this work. So they will be going out and helping with the self-report measures, and will also have a specialist mental health service nurse with them.
Dr. Bell says PTSD, mood disorders and anxiety often don't show until 8 to 12 months afterwards, so now is the right time to do the research. They'll also be looking at the positive things that have come out of the attacks.
So part of the study has been including some measures of something called post-traumatic growth, which is, we know that when some people have been through a horrendous event like this, that good things can come out of it, and often they are in the way people view themselves and what's important to them. Their connection with their faith is often highlighted as being really important.
Feroz Dita took 3 bullets to his calf muscle as he lay under a pile of bodies at the El Noor Mosque, half inside and half outside the mosque, as he attempted to flee through a broken window. His faith has played an important role in helping him to come to terms with the shooting and to forgive the man responsible.
Hatred does not achieve anything. Look where we ended up with all this hate. So it's about time we denounce hatred and we talk about love, forgiveness. It's important.
Like the researchers, Feroz Dita, who is also Secretary of the Muslim Association of Canterbury, is worried about those reluctant to come forward and seek help.
Especially widows. We had a number of them that have come from the Middle East, Pakistan, India, where culturally the men folk have been taking care of business, running households. And in their absence, in a foreign land, very little family support, they have been finding it difficult.
Dr. Bell says the circumstances surrounding the attacks are unique and their findings will be of interest to health professionals around the world. She says the mental health impact will be felt for years to come and is hoping to secure further funding to continue their work beyond this year. Kei o te tahi ahau mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Let's go to sport now. The NRL Rugby League season is officially underway, but hopes aren't high for the Warriors this year, having finished 13th out of 16 teams last season. The competition's lone New Zealand side haven't been able to make any big name signings. Add to that a raft of player injuries, and many are predicting another finish near the bottom of the NRL ladder. The Warriors, though, say there is reason for optimism in 2020. Clay Wilson reports.
Kick, then he was taken out. What's the adjudication? It's all above board, and the Warriors are going to win this one.
With just 9 wins from 24 matches, the 2019 season wasn't a memorable one for the Warriors. On the face of it, this year looms as much the same. But ahead of their season opener against the Knights in Newcastle tomorrow, Captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck says they're taking no notice of any external lack of expectation.
There's been so many years when you probably have heard of our motto, like, this is our year, we're coming out here to Chahu and all this, but no, our focus has been on us and working within ourselves, and if we need to change people's view on us, we need to change ourselves first, so that's where we've been looking.
Specifically, that focus has been on accountability and the desire to compete. Veteran playmaker Blake Green says both were lacking last year, leading to lapses in concentration and ultimately too many losses.
We've been harder on each other in terms of accountability at training, just making sure our standards are higher because we need to maintain them to ensure that we don't have any poor lapses. So we've done everything we can to make sure we're ready to deliver our best performance, so there's no excuses for us.
It's a message echoed by key forward Tohu Harris, who's back to full fitness after missing half of last year with a foot injury.
I think that's the biggest thing we got out of last year is not playing blame game or whatever it is, just know what your job is at the time and do it as best as you can, and that's something we really need to continuously be thinking about.
What the Warriors aren't thinking about is exactly where they want to end up. Green admits a positive start to the season takes on extra importance given their situation.
We're not a team full of superstars, we know that, but to get some reward early for some of the things that we've been working really hard on and put in place over the 4 months of the pre-season will just give everyone a real boost in terms of belief in what we're doing.
Stephen Kearney insists he already has that belief. The Warriors coach has backed that up, naming 20-year-old Chanel Harris-Tavita ahead of Kiwis player Cody Nikorima to partner Green in the halves. Kearney says he'll give Harris-Tavita several rounds to show he's the man for an important job.
I don't think you can, in those positions, chop and change all the time unless you really need to, so that's the plan.
Something of a surprise move from a team needing to surprise to put themselves in playoffs contention. And even if the players aren't looking that far ahead, Tuivasa Sheck says his message to Warriors fans is view 2020 with a glass half full.
Be excited, stay excited, and I know there's a lot of people there just sitting, waiting, how are we going to go, what are they going to be like, so I just asked them just to get excited for 2020, been working on a lot of different things and hope you see a new team.
The first chance to check that arrives tomorrow night in Newcastle. For Checkpoint, Clay Wilson.
Just before we go, some feedback. Some of you raising some inconsistencies around the cancellation of Pacifica. This person says many islanders would have already arrived in New Zealand and will be returning with that risk regardless. It took one visitor from New Zealand to take the measles to Samoa. It can take one visitor to take COVID-19 as well. The message goes on to say there were 3 victims of March 15 who were from Fiji. There may be relatives who have travelled to Christchurch for the anniversary who are equally at risk and could take the virus back with them. Christchurch House, however, not been cancelled. That's a reference to the memorial service. And they go on to say there's an inconsistency in government policies, which is concerning. On the person setting up a pop-up Pacifica, a couple of you think she's totally irresponsible. And Val's got in touch to say thanks for the story on Conrad. That's the 7-year-old boy who was fundraising for mosque victims. Appreciate you tuning in this evening. We'll see you again on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Fears about the worldwide effect of COVID-19 meant another rocky day on the markets, but New Zealand share market clawed back some of its losses during the day to close down 4.9%. The Prime Minister says she was devastated when she realised the scale and magnitude of last March's Christchurch mosque attacks, saying she believes they have fundamentally changed the country. The Auckland District Court has heard a 29-year-old police officer accused of raping his colleague phoned a lawyer shortly afterwards. And dozens of Wellington businesses were left without tap water today after a 100-year-old water main near the TSB Arena burst early this morning. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Allah is the Great Planner. Episode 6 of Widows of Shuhada explores what this means for the women.
I do believe that it's part of Allah's plan. And if Allah did not want this to happen, it wouldn't have happened.
Listen to episode 6 tonight in Window on the World on